Let us open in prayer. God, you are a God of justice, and you are a God of hope. Lord, we invite you into all our spaces. You are a God who is everywhere and at all times. So, Holy Spirit, impermeate the places we're at. We ask that you would speak to us, give us what we need, mend our brokenness, and enable us to seek a pure and true biblical justice. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Atatiana Jefferson, Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, Rayshard Brooks. Black lives taken at the hands of white officers have spurred unrest and agitated racial tensions. Their fatal actions have brought us to an inescapable need to seek justice. As the living, we must bear witness to their tragedies. Feelings of frustration, anger, upset, we had distress written on here. These make it evident that we are a community that is shattered. We are a broken people, broken by our broken criminal justice system. Thus, we're going to dialogue around the suffering and trauma we are experiencing by being witnesses of these tragedies, the tragedies of Black men and women who had their lives taken by the men in blue. We'll examine broken trust in law enforcement, and we'll ask the question, can there really be healing and reconciliation? Now, I don't want us to be swallowed up by grief or despair or rage, or to be as a people who are without hope. I believe it is fundamentally important for us to have these conversations around race and injustice. My hope is that this conversation will serve to relieve emotional anguish. I hope that this conversation will prompt an initiative to seek and manifest a biblical justice. I believe there is no one better who can talk to us about this area of broken trust and biblical justice than the Reverend Samuel Feemster. Reverend Feemster straddles both the law of the land and the law of the Lord. He is the pastor of the Mount Vernon Baptist Church. He is an FBI special agent, retired, and the director of the Institute for Justice Formation. I met Reverend Feemster when I was a student at the John Leland Center for Theological Studies, and I took his class, Spirituality and Law Enforcement Training. It was there where I learned God had painted a beautiful story of how he created space for Reverend Feemster to fuse the spiritual call on his life as well as the career he was called to walk out. He has taught classes in community policing and stress management. His research has been published in bulletins and magazines to include the FBI Law Enforcement Bulletin, the Police Chief Magazine, the Forensic Examiner Magazine, and Vital Speeches of Day Magazine. He has organized 4 international conferences on spirituality, wellness, and vitality in policing. He is the recipient of many awards, but his greatest award is the 38 years of marital bliss to his high school sweetheart. Together, the Feemsters have 2 adult sons. Reverend Feemster, I am so glad that you are joining us this evening. Thank you so much for accepting this invitation.
And thank you so much, Britni, for inviting me. I am delighted to serve.
Do you have any opening comments before we begin to focus on our discussion questions?
I do. I didn't join the chat responses for the one word because I don't have one word to express where I am right now. I am a son of the South. I'm a husband and a father, and these times are nightmarish because I remember the disquiet of segregated life, and now I don't sleep well at nights because I do have 2 wonderful Black sons, and the world seems to be less safe for them than it was for me, and it really wasn't safe for me. And so my opening remarks is just that I agree with you that this conversation is urgent and essential. I think we have to, hear and digest so that we can know how to move forward to be light in
Yes,
darkness and salt in a world that's filled with corrosion. So thank you again for this evening.
yes, yes. So let's get in and begin talking in the area of broken trust. Some people will say May 25th is a day that America entered into a new era of lynching. We stood in a digital crowd watching George Floyd being suffocated in broad daylight by people who were sworn to serve and protect him. And then less than a month later, Rashard Brooks is shot and killed, and the officers kick him, stand on his shoulders while he's fighting for his life. Anger, rage, distress, suffering, pain, these are all the feelings of the Black community. Who do you believe should be answering the call of brokenness in the Black community? Now, before you answer that question, I'd like to pose that question to our participants, and I have a poll question here that I'm going to launch. If you all will please respond. Who needs to answer the call in addressing the brokenness in the Black community? And I'm going to end this in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, I'm going to share the results. Take that in for a little bit. Okay. Reverend Feimster.
Well, Brittany, thank you for that for the question, and also for the survey and for sharing the results. When I think of brokenness, I think of maybe two levels. There is the reality of being spiritually broken because of the exposures to evil, because of what seems like no solutions to being delivered from the evil. We can hear the echoes of men and women of old from the text, grappling with God about how long this has to be, endured. And then I can think of the brokenness that comes from, intentionally or intentional, disadvantaged communities, or I should say communities being intentionally disadvantaged. And so I think my response is that ultimately the people who need to answer the call to address brokenness are the people who are the ultimate causers. But that would play well, I think, if we were looking at it just economically. The denial of freedoms, the denial of prosperity, the denial of flourishing as God intended. Yes, there are individuals, there are communities, there are entities, there are even philosophies that contribute to that. And so I think the answer must begin in critiquing those philosophies held by individuals and, codified by governments and enforced by, police. On the other hand, I think we who believe have to look to God for restoration. And while we're looking, not wait, but actually move out under the auspices of the Holy Spirit to be agents of that restoration, to be agents of change. And so it's a two-part question, I think, or at least it has an answer to the question that God is our refuge and God will restore us. But I think he also wants us to be agents of change in this world so that we can address the inequities that have been legalized in our society. So I think the response said that I think 39% of the people said all the peoples or the people should be responsible. I'd have to go along with the group think on that. It's not the pastor's job alone. It's not the police job alone. I think this intelligent group that we have tonight got it right. The people need to address brokenness in not just the Black community, but all communities, but specifically now, particularly based on the context of our discussion in the Black community.
Thank you. So there were results in all of the responses, response options, but I'd like us to look a little bit more on the pastor role. What is the clergy's role in picking up these broken pieces?
Yes, now that's a good question as well. You know, Britni, and I want to recall a comment or a favorite phrase by one of my mentors at the academy. He's a good man, and he taught me how to teach community policing. He'd go into the class on the first day, and he would say, "Come unity." Community, you know, and we'd all, you know, be listening, and of course I began to anticipate it because I was with him for a minute. But what he was suggesting was that if there is really anything that's true about community, it is a unity or a united people who come together to make sure that everybody you know, flourishes as God intends, or at least that's what we do when we are doing our best. And so I find this illustration appropriate for clergy in this moment. I think it's always been the way I related to clergy in my youth, and it's the way I think I try to practice. And so the broken pieces in a community, I think it's more than just the residents. It's more than just the people who have been denied, you know, the people who have been disenfranchised and pushed to the margin. I think the people who do that are also broken. And so I think from a pastoral standpoint, the job is to bring all those people together. It is to help the government see you know, its deficiencies, and it's also to encourage believers to live into their rights and to prepare themselves so that they can you know, be contributing citizens. So the role of the clergy, I think, is to bring unity. You know, and one of the things I think that would help us get started on this is just to ask people to describe their preferred future. I think if you ask the entrepreneurs about their preferred future, you might find that it would be pretty much like the preferred future of the people who are in the community and maybe being denied the essentials for life. And so I think the second question would be, what role are you prepared to perform to remove any obstacles to that future? And I think that there could be some synergy built around, you know, getting to a preferred future. I'm not naive to think that, you know, this can be done without asking people to adjust their economic expectations. But I think the role of the clergy is to contend with the obstacles in the community and thereby bring unity.
Community.
Community.
So continuing with this thought on broken trust, these recent high-profile incidents have caused authorities to put a critical eye on police use of force, and it has resurrected some raw memories of racial disparities and injustices in policing. Philandro Castile, Alton Sterling, Tamir Rice, Eric Gartner, Michael Brown, we all know their names and their stories. In your opinion, what has contributed to officers' biased perceptions of Black men? Because we've seen that there's a disproportionate amount of force used on Blacks by officers compared to their white counterparts.
So I'd like to relate another story, if I will. It's the best way for me to learn and share. At the academy, I had the privilege of being in class or teaching an officer. He was actually a police chief from a city in Texas, and we had a private conversation, and he talked about all that happened around Juneteenth and how it seemed to be such a disorderly day, and people were, were just, large crowds moving and breaking ordinances, and and not attending to the rules, and it seemed to be one of the days that caused him a lot of frustration. And so we asked about his understanding of Juneteenth, and he had none. He had no, I mean, he was the police chief, and he could not relate to what was the excitement in the community. And so I began to explore that with him, his lack of understanding of the community that he was supposed to be protecting and serving. This same police chief, we talked about the reference points, talking about a suburb as opposed to a project. And so we began to, delve into the definition of those words. When you say suburb, what do you mean? And he had a very clear idea. And then we asked about what is a project? And it's something that's not complete. It's something that needs to be finished. It's something that needs to be fixed if it's broken. And so the attitude that his officers would take if they were responding to a call from the suburbs was different from the attitude that they would take if they were responding to a call from a quote unquote project. You have steel-toed shoes and hard hats and a hard attitude going towards a place under construction. On the other hand, you have an attitude going towards the suburbs that's like, these are families with real people. And my question was, but there's 3 generations of families that's living in this house over here, and it's really a home, but you approach it as if it's a project, if it's something that's broken and needs you to fix it.
Wow.
And so what contributes to this attitude about the imbalance in enforcement is the pervasive attitude in our society. All police come from our society. And so it is long established because of our theologies that the mistreatment of Black males in particular is acceptable. And so we can begin to do a review of history and sort of see that. And so when you have laws or norms that are legalized, there's no way to take that bias out unless that's an intentional, discussion, and then the practices are, I guess, superintended so that doesn't happen. But the use of force in communities that are intentionally disadvantaged has as much to do with self-fulfilling prophecy as it does with anything else. See, I told you they would tear up everything. I told you they weren't any good. And so that's the attitude from the society. Our police are products of our society. Our police actually do what the society permits.
So I encourage our participants to continue to comment in our chat feature. I'd like to have another poll. I'm going to launch this now. Let's see, how do I do this? Okay. Today, if you were to see a police officer pull over an African American, what would you likely do? What would be your response today? We have a couple more responses coming in. Going to end this poll in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I'll share the results. So it looks like 14% would actually engage with the officer. 41% will pull over and record. It's the most likely response, and it's 50-50 for if your answer was the same from last year. Okay, I'm gonna stop sharing the results. Any comment on those responses, Reverend Feemster?
Yes, I do think that a comment is appropriate on those responses. I appreciate that the climate has changed significantly, and that the urgency of reporting is absolutely important. The introductory statement to my sermon on Sunday was that if the murder of George Floyd had not been recorded, an alternate report might have been submitted that would have garnered support, and the outcome would possibly be different. And so recording is certainly an instrument now that can be used to make sure that the facts are not in dispute. At the same time, I do believe that a word of caution is appropriate. The hypertensive, the hypertension that is now, and has been, involved in car stops and policing and whatnot. The statistics are worth reading. The dangers of stopping a motorist are severe, significant. When I worked as a special agent at Washington Field Office, I was on the SWAT team, and one of my SWAT buddies was assassinated by by motorist who was wanted in D.C. He was stopped in North Carolina, but his car wasn't searched. And so when he got to D.C., he carried out his plans, and he executed my SWAT mate. Many police officers are hit by motorists while they're trying to, protect and serve. And so I think we have to have a real balance, and we have to be real, I think, judicious in deciding whether or not we should engage an officer who is in exercise of his duty, or how that can be done safely. And so I do appreciate where we are, and I do admit that when I was actually serving the government and serving my nation as a special agent, that I even then exercised caution as to what would be appropriate, an appropriate response if I saw something happening, and how I should respond. And I encourage all of you to be thoughtful in that way as well. So yes, interesting response you have there. Do all things not in haste, but under the auspices of the Holy Spirit.
I'm just going to share the results one more time. While you're looking over that, I will say the historical relationship between African Americans and law enforcement has not been pretty. The police violence in Selma carried out on civil rights demonstrators known as Bloody Sunday to the brutal beating of Rodney King is evidence of this unlovely history we have. What event in history stands out for you as the start of the Black community losing trust in law enforcement?
So I pondered this question for a while. This is very interesting because identifying an event is difficult when the continuum is really unbroken, and so I may not have a very clear answer on this, but let me try. Okay. So I'm 65 years old. I don't know if I told you all that, but I'm happy to be 65 years old. And I attended segregated school for the first 5 years of my life. in North Carolina, Gaston County, North Carolina. Um, each year, we would have a May Day parade. White school actually got together. The bands would march down Main Street in Cherryville. Uh, and there was an auxiliary police officer named William Edwards. He was the agriculture teacher. Some of you won't know anything about Future Homemakers of America or Future Farmers of America, but those used to be real classes that people signed up for. And he was the Future Farmers of America teacher and was very well known in the county because of his usefulness to farmers, dairy farmers, hog farmers, very, very sort of a country doctor, if you will. But on that day, he would be dressed as an auxiliary police officer. He didn't have any police powers, but his role was to sort of keep the black citizens in line. Mr. Edwards would grab you by your ear and pull you back up on the sidewalk if you were off the sidewalk. And if you resisted him, he just simply told your parents and you get another whipping. That's the way it was. When I became a man and looked and began to understand the history of our country, I appreciated that Mr. Edwards was keeping me out of trouble. He was loving me in a way that other people might not, if they had caught me violating the rules, which was to stay on the sidewalk. And so, you know, that's an early event, but it's not, you know, it's not one of those policing events that shows up, but it's a continuum. As I try to understand what would be an event. So I go even further. This is not one I remember, but it's one that I was told.
Okay.
I was born in Gaston County Negro Hospital in 1954. And somebody's asking the question, was Mr. Edwards black or white? Mr. Edwards was black. Mr. Edwards was black on the, I mean, he was a real brother, father, teacher, community friend. And Mr. Edwards was in a sense, he was our savior, but we didn't know it when we were that young. And so I was born at Gaston County Negro Hospital in 1954. If my father had attempted to take my mother to Gaston County Memorial Hospital, it would have precipitated an enforcement event because we couldn't go to the life of segregation. So I think the continuum between, you know, what happened at Port Conference in 1619, what happened with the Fugitive Slaves Act, what happened with the Black Codes, Jim Crow, New Jim Crow, the war on drugs, the war on poverty, mass incarceration, it is inextricably linked. So it would be probably not wise for me to say there was an event, but there are just a series of events. And so I give you another reality for me. This happened in 1977 as a first-year law student at Wake Forest University. And I started trying to understand the rationale of the Supreme Court of the United States in the Scottsboro Boys trial, and then Plessy v. Ferguson, and all these cases where the Supreme Court said that I had no more right than a bale of cotton. My grandparents, you know, that black folks didn't have any rights that white folks had to recognize or acknowledge. This is the Supreme Court, and I'm sitting there in the class, and I'm trying to hide, but I really can't hide because I'm the only black male in the class. That's a seminal event, but it's a continuum. So, Britni, I can't say that there is one event because there's no separation between the traumas of any event. And so, what happened, you know, to George Floyd, you know, it sort of adds to the trauma of being Black, and I should add Christian in this nation, because when you are trying to serve the Lord, your responses to what you encounter are supposed to be measured and a little different. And so I don't have one event, Britni, but I have a series of events. Is that okay? I hope that's okay.
I can accept that answer.
I just can't find, there's just not one. And and the more I learn, the more I remember, and so then, and the more things happen, the more it all pieces together. And it's just a tapestry. They're not unbroken. It's just a series. It's a continuum of events.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you for sharing that. I'm hoping that this conversation will get us to mobilize in seeking justice. And historically, the civil rights movement was mobilized by Black preachers in the Black church. What would you say would be your response to those who claim there is no clergy leading the Black Lives Matter movement? There's an absence of clergy leading this movement.
I found this question to be arresting on many levels. And so thank you for asking it. At Mount Vernon, where I get to serve, before each sermon, I ask the worshipers to pray with me. Maybe you do that, Reverend Johnson, or maybe your pastor does that. If you're listening, you get ready to pray and you read the scriptures, and maybe you're an offer of prayer. Sometimes it goes like, move me out of the way, Lord, so that people can hear you. It's sort of a thing that, I don't want to be heard, and then we yell as loud as we can. But beyond that, and so at the end of the prayer, at the end of that prayer, I always say, and all the preachers said, and the congregation has learned to say, Amen, because we are preaching together, and so the congregation has a responsibility to know and handle the word in as much as the clergy does, and so I believe that that's happening. That happens in the preaching moment, and I believe that all moments are preaching moments. And likewise, at Mount Vernon, on the second Sunday of each month, we observe the Lord's Supper. And I know that you are familiar with the Lord's Supper, however that may be played out in your tradition. Most often I read 1 Corinthians 11, 23 through 26, because we are the New Testament church, I believe. And so I like to locate us there so that we can accept our responsibility as regarding the Lord's Supper. And so I use verse 23 through 25 to guide us through, eating the bread and drinking the wine. And when we get to verse 26, this is what it says in the NRSV version. It says, "For as often as you eat this bread and drink the cup, you proclaim the Lord's death until he comes." And I say to the congregation and to myself, we are all proclaimers. We're all proclaimers. And so on the second Sunday, they hear that they are they're preachers, and then they also hear that we are proclaimers. And so I remind the worshipers that we are proclaimers, and that wherever our feet, wherever our feet touch the earth, that's our mission field. And on that field, we are to contend with whatever evil that obstructs, access to human flourishing that God desired. And so we are to fight injustice so that all creatures or all creation experience God's justice. And so I try to empower the congregation that we are in this together. Now, as far as the clergy and the authority given to clergy, I want to say quickly that the authority given to clergy does not diminish the responsibility of Christians everywhere to advocate for the deconstruction of structures and systems that perpetuate injustice everywhere. And I want to make that clear. So to silence the voice of educators or advocates and worshipers because they are not under some sort of denominational covering, I believe might be rejecting the voice of God. Uh, the civil rights movement was the magnificent culmination of years of preparation across many vocations and involving many heroes and heroines whose names and whose deeds are not captured as part of the movement by people who are trying to narrate the movement externally. You know, the civil rights movement was not a singular event. There have been many fields have been plowed. You know, many obstacles have been moved for that moment in time to be able to be launched by the church. And so I think that the absence of clergy or the perception of the absence of clergy in the movement it very well may reflect a resistance to acknowledging that divinely ordained actions arise from locations other than the organized church. And I don't see that that's a problem for heaven. At the Institute of Justice Formation, for example, where Britni introduced that we are trying to teach there, we advocate for humans across all vocations to do what is just and right intrinsically. And so our classroom is open to everyone called to be their brother's keeper, manifested as love for one's neighbor. And so the absence of leadership from traditional roles should not be interpreted as the absence of divinely ordained leadership. And I see that maybe we are interrupted. Maybe Britni is gone. I'm not sure. So I'll just.
Oh, I'm here.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. I didn't know what happened there. And so I do have another comment just to make on that. And that is that advocacy on behalf of the intentionally disadvantaged is ordained because it is the heart of the ministry of Jesus. And so whether it comes from a person, you know, in one industry or one profession or another profession, it doesn't diminish the role of the church. And there are times when I think the pastor has done, or the clergy, they've done what they do, and it makes room for other voices. It makes room for other voices. And so I think that we have to look at this as a positive, whether or not advocates outside the organized church reject God or not, simply does not diminish God's will to use them to advance his kingdom. When I think about God using people to advance his kingdom that may not believe in him, my mind goes to Pharaoh. You know, I mean, them old boys thought you know, but God was using them to build his own nation. And so I think, Britni, that we need, it might be good for us to listen for the voice of God, to look for the activity of God, and to give God thanks for raising up ministers who cry out in spaces where clergy may either have been silenced or simply not revered. But if there's people there calling out for justice, I do believe that they are advancing the radical ministry of God for justice. Because if such voices are not against us, then perhaps they are for us, or at least they might be against our enemy. And so while it's important to assess the role of the church in every generation, Black church, post-civil rights in particular, I think we must be careful not to allow ourselves to be divided. You know, the voices that are advocating for everybody to flourish should be brought together and not divided. And I'll add this comment as well, and I'll be finished. Sometimes the way to tell whether an initiative, an action, a movement is ordained is to just look at the response that it gets from oppressing forces.
I really appreciate you sharing on that, because I have actually been questioning, where is the church in all of this? And I have been trying to wrap my head around the relevancy of the church in this mass social justice movement. In fact, I'm going to be hosting another talk next month where I invite some homiletics preachers and prophetic preachers in the African American tradition to kind of talk about police violence and protests and what the Black church needs to hear from its Black preacher along this. So I hope, you know, whoever's on here now will possibly join us next week.
Well, Britni, I might add to that, that some of our musicians are laying down some heavy gospel, but it's not in the gospel genre. And not and to dismiss that as a prophetic word because it doesn't come from the church choir is possibly to miss the voice of God. You know, I think this is a day where we have to consider what kind of rocks are crying out, and not just because the pastors aren't crying out, but you know, the pastors have done and continue to do a wonderful job, but they've also, because of their courage, made room for other people to be courageous. There was a day, and some of the, if anybody is close to 65, you might be able to attest to that. But there was a day where a pastor might have been inclined to tell you to be more careful than to lose your job because you took a knee at the national anthem. Your pastor might have been saying, you know, son, are you sure that that's the right thing to do? Are you sure that you're hearing God? But now, because of the courage of pastors, you know, others are courageous enough to stand up. So I think, again, we want to listen for the voice of God, look for the actions of God, and in any event, thank God for people who are joining their voice with us and make a symphony of voices that are crying out for a dignity for all people made in the image of God.
Since we're on the topic of pastors, I'd like us to move into mission and mending. And you are convinced that the offices of the pastor and police are ordained offices. So can you explain this conviction?
So when I looked at this question again today, Britni, I said, I ought to call Britni and take her to take this question out, because she asked me this question from class, and that's not fair. Let me say this to you, because I appreciate that this conviction on my part sounds, you know, it sounds like I am being disloyal, and it sounds like I have my head in the sand. And so let me allow you those feelings first, and then let me see if you feel the same when I give my explanation. I did not come from a long line of preachers or police. I was raised in a community where respect for the law of God and the laws of society were inculcated. We were taught to respect all authority, and could receive multiple whippings, as we call it, without even a double jeopardy concern being raised. You know, I could get a whipping for being at Color U May's house and doing something wrong, and time I get home, I can get another one because I did something wrong at Color U May's house. And we didn't have telephones, so I don't know how the word got there before I got there, but it would get there, and I could get another whipping. But as we matured, we understood that the admonition to obey all authority did not apply to illegitimate or corrupt authority. Unfortunately, we were not always able or not always in position to disobey corrupt authority, but we were clear about the difference. And so from that community, from the community that nurtured me, and remember, I told you it was a segregated community. It was a Black enclave. We didn't have any policing there. I saw the county sheriff when he came to tell my daddy that he was on jury duty, because the jurors are, you know, selected from property ownership roles. And so that's how They ended up at my dad's house. But from that community, I learned that protecting people from evil and all of its iterations and delivering people from natural disasters or their own incapacities are works ordained by God. And I understood that because God loves justice. Over the years, I've learned that the common welfare depends upon justice and fidelity in policing. But it depends upon justice and fidelity in all vocations. But tonight we're talking about policing. Human flourishing across all levels is impossible without justice and fidelity in policing. And so I've come to the conclusion I didn't come to this conclusion after 28 years, but during my years of service as an FBI agent, 15 years of which I spent at the FBI National Academy, learning from police executives from across our nation and around the world how to have this conversation. I am convinced that policing is God's business, since justice is God's business. And so when God admonished me during a class at Quantico that he wanted me to be a change agent and not just a special agent, I began to understand what he was saying. You're in a position here to affect the world, not just to serve the needs of the government as such. And I appreciate that that's the responsibility of all of us in whatever position that we're in. And so I can't say that policing as a profession is evil or less spiritual than serving in any other profession. What I can say, and I do say unequivocally, is that God does not endorse abusive policing. God does not endorse corrupt policing. God does not endorse policing that is done with an economic edge. Because policing at its best is a work of servant leaders whose hearts are inclined towards the common good. I listen to and I know people who let me say it like this. Police, many people who are in uniform, they meet people in their hour of need much more than pastors or priests or imams or rabbis. The number of people that die in accidents and other catastrophes, the number of people that die in hospitals with a religious leader by their side, you can decide whether it's more or less, but that's really not the point. When somebody is at a crime scene or an accident scene, and there's someone there making a rescue or a delivery, that's God's service. And I can't take that away from the good men and women in law enforcement. Notwithstanding what we saw on the screen, I don't think that's what 1,000 police would do 1,000 times over. And so what I want to say is that policing cannot be regarded as a unilateral work of a secular organization, because police are dealing with human lives and the spirit of humanity, if you will. And so police must be understood as a divine calling that gives life to the police at first, and then to hope to others as second. Others secondly. Everybody in policing don't believe in God. I tell you that right now. And when I floated this conversation in the police academy, there were people that just simply didn't believe it, and so their source of strength was themselves. They were basically secular humanists. But I believe that police persons who believe in God are ministering angels, and that they have the ministry of reconciliation as much as a pastor or anyone else. Because when I took the oath to serve the government, I did not have to denounce my God. Had I had to do that, I would not have become a special agent. And I've prayed with more than one police and gone to church with several police. As a matter of fact, my family, is a family of preachers and deacons and church teachers and police. And so the two vocations are congruent, I think, when they are done for the Lord. But then so is practice in law or practice in medicine or any vocation. So I tell you this one thing. David Carter Dr. David Carter, who was one of the brains behind the whole policing, the community policing movement, said that he shared a story with me that basically said that there's nothing more dangerous in our nation than a maverick police or police that's rogue. He said, listen, Sam. He said, think about all of the authority that we give and all the deference that we give. There's not anybody on this call that if a police siren starts going off and you're in front of them, you move out of the way. You know, if you're in an office building and the police come in and say everybody has to get out, you get out. And so we have given them so much authority over our lives until the worst, he said, Sam, the worst thing in the world right now, in the United States right now, is a rogue police, because they can do immeasurable harm. And the harm that's done is not just, you know, what we saw with Floyd, but it's all the other things that happened before that day, you know, trampling the dignity of humans. And so I think my conviction that police or that the profession of policing is a calling, in as much as Mr. Edwards' profession is a calling, or my profession is a calling, or the musician's profession is a calling. I think it's what I want us to focus on. Now, let me tell you why this gives me hope. Why this gives me hope. If I just throw the police away and say that the profession is no good, and nor are the people any good, then I don't pray for them. If I just throw them away and say I don't pray for them. But if I say that the vocation, the profession is designed to rescue and protect and to really give people help, then I can pray for them. I can intercede for them. But don't hear me say for once that God endorses corruption in any vocation or in any profession. I just say that the church has to change the heart of policing by praying for the intervention of God. The government is not interested in changing the heart of policing. The church has to ask God to do that. And so, you know, we have to we have to pray while we bleed. We got to bless while we bleed. If you feed them rascals, they'll stop. Just to be clear, I'm convicted that as a pastor, my role is to work with police who are working for God. And last thing I'll say is that at Mount Vernon, we created a refuge for police. It's just a little room, and we have a realtor's lock on the door, and they can come in and use the restroom. We got a Keurig machine in there and some water, and we put some bagged food in there, you know, tater chips and whatnot. But what we're trying to say to them is that we care for you, and we care that you care for us. Before COVID, I learned that there was 2 graduates from Liberty University who are police officers on the Alta Police Force who were holding a Bible study in that refuge room. Now, you may come to that Bible study and be playing with Jesus if you want to, but when the Holy Spirit get a hold of you, you'll be doing policing the right way.
Yes.
And if we can touch 2 or 3 at a time, if we can touch 1 at a time, you know, we just can't give up on God and throw the force away any more than we would throw away doctors. And we know there's serious discrimination in our healthcare systems and whatnot, but we don't throw away our doctors. And so I would suggest that we take a different approach to how we hope to help reform or change the system of policing in our country.
Thank you, Reverend Feemster. I don't want us to close this without having our participants get an opportunity to speak. So I'm going to open up the forum. I'd like to do this in decency and order. There is a raise your hand feature on Zoom. If you would just raise your hand and I can get a call on you. Do you see that feature? I believe it's under participants. How do I see?
I was on another call
So
today,
I have
Britni, and they were
Kevin.
using it. You found it?
Yeah, I see.
All right.
K Perk. Let's unmute.
Is it unmuted?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Yeah, I understand, you know, police officers are human. They're, subject to every foible that we have. But, it, I guess, because I was the one who put down frustrated, because it is frustrating because I have family members who are police officers, and some of the worst that police officers have done, my family members have never done. And there are other police officers out there who have never done it either. There's police officers who have just come out and just aided people just because it was the right thing to do. And I think it's kind of sad, that sometimes we're forgetting about that 100 to 1, the ones who do their jobs every day, because of that 1 in 100 that's causing issues. And I've seen so many things on the web, Facebook, and it just amazes me. Is first of all how some of these officers who have done what they've done, they go as far as giving contradictory instructions to the people that they're apprehending. I just saw one police officer on the web. He grabs a man from behind in a bear hug, so his arms are pinned at his side, and then he says, "Put your arms behind your back." How do you put your arms behind your back when they're pinned at your side? And so his solution was, "You're not listening to me." He picked them up, he threw them to the ground, only to find out the man he threw to the ground was not even the man they were looking for. He had nothing to do with whatever crime had happened. And to me, if we are willing as ministers to see them as humans with the goodness of God in them and the fallacies of man in them, they've just got to see the same in us. When you're consistently saying, "What did I do?" and they can't answer that, or you go and say, "I have a situation," and they act like you're the enemy when you're coming to them for help. If we as ministers were to have done that to members of our flock or those we serve, we would be called out for that. So to me, anyone who serves the public, whether it's spiritually through the church or secularly through government agencies, they've got to keep in mind they serve the people, not a chosen group, the people. And to me, it's amazing. Respect doesn't take any time to give, but it gives you a lot back in return.
Thank you so much, brother. I endorse that. I actually appreciate on many levels. I have family in law enforcement as well. My brother retired from the county police force. His wife was a sheriff deputy. My nephew retired from Charlotte Mecklenburg, and I have a great nephew who is now with the Gaston County Sheriff's Office. But before I entered into the bureau, we didn't have any law enforcement in our family. So as opportunities come, and we take those opportunities to serve God as we serve, our country or the people in our country, I think we can bring about a change. The biblical cry of "How long?" is ours as well. And brother, own your frustration, because I think sometimes innovations and creativity can come out of those frustrations. So own them, don't deny them, but let us figure out not how to get back at them, but how to save the future. how do I make it so that my grandson doesn't have to deal with this because my sons are already dealing with it? So my role as clergy, my role as a neighbor, my role as an instructor is to bring us to a point where we are really willing to review the truth about our relationships. Because only when we review the truth about our relationships can we have the proper information upon which to change those relationships. But I'm here to tell you tonight that rules without relationships will always equal rebellion. Okay, rules without relationships can equal riots, as they call them, revolutions. And so we have to define what the actions are that we're taking. But thank you so much for your comment. And it's good to see you again.
Anyone else? Comment? Question? Reverend Feaster, I want
Britni,
Yes.
this is Ella. A question I have that I can't seem to, that runs through my head is how many, I'm in absolute agreement that the whole police, all of the policemen are not bad. Let's say majority of them are not bad police officers. But I cannot wrap my head around how they stood by and saw this injustice done. I'm sure countless times. I would even like to find out from Minister Feaster. I mean, did you see injustice done and the silence? You know, good men, good officers, good police officers, people like you that were in the force, okay? And they saw a lot of this stuff done and allowed it to happen.
Thank you so much. I think the relationship inside of a department or an agency is like the relationships inside of every department or any department or agency. They're human relationships, and there are superiors and there are inferiors. And and there are job assignments, and there are all kinds of things that can be done to you, legitimately or not. If you're sort of not a team player, and some of that sort of gets inculcated in just the way things are taught. Some of the language that can come up would be, okay, so that's what they taught you at the academy. Now let me show you how it's really done. And so it goes like that. It's a fraternity, if you will, of people who sometimes are friends, maybe not, but they have to depend on each other for their lives. So I don't justify what we view, and I don't justify the things that happen that we have not got to see. But this is what I did, and this is what I would encourage believers to pray for. And my very first arrest, the very first arrest that I was a part of as a member of the FBI, I was privileged to have a field training officer who taught me how to do it right. But there were some police officers there who came to help. But as I was putting the subject in the car, he said that I was treating him too nice. And his rationale was that I should jerk him around just for making me come to get him. Now that can happen to you over years. You can sort of get callous, and people don't care about your work, or I don't know why that can happen, ma'am. But what I'm trying to say is that I was privileged by God to have a training agent who did not allow me to go down that road, and it was just simply by the way he conducted himself. And so I think it's the way that people conduct themselves on both sides, the way we respond to mistreatment, and because I think if we respond, in a positive way, not in a docile way, but in a positive way to mistreatment, I think we can get some change. But I don't know that anybody can truly explain the inaction of the people as we viewed it on the screen. with the George Floyd situation, but I do think that there is a power. There is if you're a believer in Jesus, and you read that Corinthians text where Paul says that our battle is not against flesh and blood, but it's against the prince of the air and principalities in high places. This is true. And so we hire our police so that they are the ones who are dealing with a lot of evil that diminishes us physically. The rest of us are dealing with evil all the time too. It just doesn't sort of, assault us physically, but maybe spiritually. But these folks, they respond to the crime scenes, they respond to the accident scenes, they respond to the national disasters. We're running away from a burning building, they're running into a burning building. It has to be, I think, a gift of God. But you can be overwhelmed by all of it. That doesn't make any excuses for what we saw, from those officers. But it does, I think, as the brother was speaking earlier, help us to understand that we are humans, that we are, frail. Many of us are concerned about economic security. Many of us are concerned about promotional abilities. All of these things are at play, in a moment like that.
We still have time for questions and comments. Pastor Burris.
Good evening. I wanted to go back. You asked the question, where are the clergy? I look at it from a totally different perspective. You have to understand when Martin Luther King and those guys, they were in their 20s. I'm in my mid-50s, okay, in the midst of a pandemic, trying to keep a church together. So we're trying to balance two things. But when you really think about it, Martin Luther King and Jesse Jackson and John Lewis, all those guys were in their 20s. So they were younger. And we have to remember they fought and gave their lives to give us a right that we as colored people are not using. I think one of the greatest things that clergy are now doing, and I've shared this with you before, is we have to educate our people on what election really is. It's not based upon the name. You have to research the records, educate the people. If you don't like the way the police are doing things, then who are you putting in as county executive? Where do they stand? Okay, your council members, even bond bills. What happens in our communities is that we don't understand what we're voting for. We vote for a person because the person is popular. And we have some people that are probably out there that can do a great job, okay, and moving things forward to change the community by laws. And really, if you really ask me, until people change their hearts and get to know the Lord, things really aren't going to change much. But really, our forefathers fought and died for us to have this right. And the right is being misused because a lot of folks don't really understand how powerful their vote is, and then holding those who are put in office accountable. You have to remind them that, okay, hey, you got 4 years. Well, guess what? We can make your 4 years terrible, but once again, here are the things that the community wants, and it's the expectation of those who we put in office, they must now follow up and do. And if they don't do it, next person up. And so we really have to educate our people. And I've said this because as president of the Coalition of Pastors in Temple Hills, we've come to the point that if we can't find a candidate that is for the community, because we're working with the community and the businesses in the community, and if they don't have the same principles that we're looking for, then we'll look for somebody else and we'll back them and we'll put them in office because they have the best interest for the community and the businesses in which they're supposed to be serving. So Black Lives Matters, more power to them. They're younger, they got lots of energy. I would love to be out there, but right now, I got to take care of people that are dying. They can't be with their loved ones for weeks and then get a phone call, sit it down. I'm now dealing with new types of grieving. So I give it to you young Joshuas and Joshuans to go out and stand and bring notice. And then those who are back in the churches need to begin to educate the community in order for them to choose the right candidates to put in office to make change. Thank you.
Thank you. Pastor Burris is the pastor of Central Baptist of Camp Springs. anyone else have their hand raised for a question or comment? We still have some time left. Okay, Carolyn, I think I see you raising your hand over there. Let me unmute. Okay, there you go.
Okay, thank you. There are, and my church name is up there because, yeah, I'm Carolyn Burrell, and my church name is up there because this morning I was talking to Zoom. I just have to explain this, and we're talking about moving my account under corporate account, so I put Mount Zion in and took my name out, so I'll have to change that. But at any rate, there are just so many layers to this topic that we're discussing tonight. You know, when we talk about policing in the community and within our communities in this country, the relationship between the churches, our pastors, and the police department, whether or not police officers need to live in the communities in which they serve. There are just so many things that we have to consider. So I think we kind of have to start like gradually, you know, it's like having an onion and having to unpeel the many layers from the onion. Ella, in response to what you were, Sister Ella, in response to what you were asking about, you know, why is it that police officers, and I'm thinking, and I think you were referring to the George Floyd situation, how is it that they can stand around and allow another officer or other officers, you know, to have the knee on the neck or a foot on other parts of his body? And of course, that's happened so often over the years in this country. Dr. Feimster said something about it being like a fraternal order of police. And the police are like a fraternity or a sorority. And in any organization or group, you have your norms, the abnorms, you have the cultures, you have the accepted behaviors and unaccepted behaviors. You have renegade people and you have those that are more respectable. And I think a large part of this is education and understanding the needs of the communities that we serve, those that are in law enforcement, really having a very clear understanding. And some jurisdictions require that law enforcement officials live in those communities. And that means that if they live in those communities, they are, they get to know the people where they live, and people have certain expectations of them, and they probably have more of a relationship with those persons, and feel like they owe them respect, at least in terms of the way that they do their jobs. But around in this area, all jurisdictions, well, I'll say across the United States, that's not required in all areas. And I think that contributes also to how sometimes police officers react. And there does need to be still a partnership, I think, between our churches and our law enforcement officials. And we have gotten away from that, I think, as we've grown, as social justice programs are no longer in the church, in many of our churches. And as Reverend Burris, I think it was saying, there's so many issues that the clergy have to focus on. It's like, where do you start? And, you know, there are some churches in this area that are being very vocal about Black Lives Matter and are protesting, but everyone can't. And like right now, and I'm not, you know, legitimizing anything that anyone is doing or not doing. I'm just saying there's so many issues in the Black community today that really do have to be addressed. And one of the concerns that I hear so often is that, where are our Black leaders? Who are our Black leaders? You know, is there any one person that's really leading the Black community? Well, there are probably several. And depending on what has happened most recently and what the media is talking about, different people rise to the surface. So I'm sorry. So that's part of my contribution for tonight. And I'll be in touch.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much, Carolyn, for that. This is so many levels. You're absolutely right. And just so much to do. I'm excited that clergy has help. That there are other people are stepping into their roles and using their gifts and talents to advance the kingdom. So I'm excited about it.
Sam, do you want to share your contact information and speak about the Institute for Justice Formation in closing?
I am excited about the opportunity that we have at the John Leland Center for Theological Studies. We are located in Arlington, right off Highland Street. We're very accessible. I think not many steps from the Clarendon Metro. And so I'm excited about the opportunity God has provided for us to have this conversation and many other conversations about justice formation. Our focus there is, again, to investigate and promote the transformational power of biblical justice. And I'm focusing, we're focusing on biblical justice, not comparing biblical justice to criminal justice or civil justice or economic justice or environmental justice or any of those other categories. But what does God say in his word about justice? And then what does that mean for those of us who believe in God? Because if our God is a God of justice and we are God's people, then we have to be a people of justice. And so we have the graduate certificate in justice formation, which is an 18-hour certificate. We would invite you to check that out on our Leland webpage. You can find more about that there. We still have room in our cohort groups. So if you're excited about this conversation and you want to check us out and see if you want to join us, just go to that website there, go to graduate certificates, and you'll find some information. My personal email at Leland is there, Sam Feemster at Leland. The phone number is my cell number. I don't lift weights with it, but I do everything else with it near my side. I don't cut grass with it, but I do everything else with it pretty close. So you can get hold to me and leave me a message. I'll call you back. But I'm so glad to have shared this time with you. And I'm excited about the questions. I'm excited about the surveys that Britni put out. And thank you for having me.
Thank you, Sam. And if anyone wishes to connect with me or Being and Becoming Spiritual Retreat Center, this is the way you can get in touch with me. Being and Becoming has an Instagram, so please connect there for our next Brit Talk. I mentioned that we're going to be having a discussion in July on the prophetic message to the Black church. I'm hoping to have 2 homiletics professors and African-American preaching tradition preachers to come and speak with us there. And we'll just talk about the relevancy of the Black church in this social justice movement, what the Black church needs to hear amid police violence and protests. You can contact me via email, connect with me on YouTube or Instagram, and I am welcoming any and all feedback. You can send your feedback to my email. You can leave a comment or a testimonial if you're interested in having a testimonial for public release and use. It could be a written one or a video one. I'm just asking that written testimonials be no more than 3 sentences and your video testimonials be no more than 20 seconds. Thank you all for joining me on this Brit Talk. I am just truly blessed by your presence and your participation. And I just thank Reverend Feemster for joining us as well. And with that, I will say the Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord turn his face towards you and give you peace. Amen. Have a good evening, everyone.
Amen. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Blessings to all.
Bless you. Bless you.